Sure, but there's no contract with the developer. At this point, the city has spent a few $1,000s to contract with an engineering firm to look at the feasibility of whether or not it could even be done. And so that's where these drawings that you're seeing have come from here. Of course, this has been talked about at Planning Commission meetings numerous times. It's also been talked about at City Council meetings numerous times. And we're finally at the place where we have conceptual drawings back, and we wanted to engage the public at a deeper level to offer this open house again, to come through and say, well, here's our concerns or thoughts, and make sure that that is entered into a decision-making process. So that is the background. I can answer questions for the whole group if you'd like, but again, the intent was kind of to go through, point, touch, feel, and answer anything that you might have. But it's up to you. If you want to throw out a question, I'm glad to try to answer.
How much pressure did you get up from all the residents of Richland Center to do this project? You just got it from the council, the planning commission people, and none of the residents? You didn't ask any of the residents their thoughts on the subject?
Well, there have been, so are you talking about pressure from the community, like in general, to do a specific project, or are you talking about the overall economic environment?
Just about Stori Field in particular.
So the primary pressure is coming from the fact that we have done studies to know how much housing is available in the city of Richland Center. So we know, for example, that the apartment units out by the campus have a waiting list that's equal to another building. We know that these types of duplex developments, I think it's owned by Dr. Williams, is that correct? There by the community center. We know that there's a waiting list on that. As a matter of fact, I think Mr. McCorkle lives there and probably knows roughly what the waiting list is.
It's about 30 people.
One time I heard 31.
It's about 30 people.
30 people. So there's also, we know, a waiting list for the other types of housing. We know through economic development meetings, the mayor certainly can attest to the fact that we have numerous people calling and saying, we'd like to live in Richland Center, but there's no place to live. And so there is a very broad-based need for housing. And on top of that, there's a very broad-based need for additional employees, so or workforce. We track that number, and we know that throughout Richland County, there's roughly a need for, or about 600 open jobs. We know for sure, because of conversations with local manufacturers, for example, Rockwell, we know that their plant is operating at 60% capacity, and one of their main problems is they can't get employees. It's very difficult to get employees if we don't have housing. So the campus housing that was formerly the dorms, that became available. That housing became finally available to the public and not specifically set aside for students because of some shifts there, and that housing is full. So everything that we have is full, and that is what has driven the conversation, and the conversation has revolved around needing housing of all types and in all segments. So that means apartment buildings, it means single-family homes of multiple levels, it means very entry-level housing opportunities, and it means housing development like this type, which would be duplex or condominium type of development, which would be zero-step entrance, which would allow people who own homes but want less maintenance and are concerned about steps to move into a nice next stage of life living situation. So that was a very long answer. Did I give you what you wanted?
No, I don't know if you did or not.
Okay.
Listen to you.
So the pressure has come from overall looking at multiple sectors of the economy, listening to people who are looking for homes, listening to the job shortages, and knowing that all of the places that we have available for housing are for the most part full, and for the housing market in Richland Center, at one point we had 6 places on the market in Richland Center, or 10 places on the market, And that number should more be closer to 20 or 30 places on the market so that you have the supply to meet a 6-month demand. So they're all data points that have gone into this discussion and to try to determine what the city needs to do, planning commission needs to do in order to encourage new housing.
I was going to say, the apartments out by the campus, you'd said that they're full, they've got a long waiting list. Wasn't there conditions that once that one got full, the builder, I thought, was committed that he had to build again out there? And I'm wondering, what's the status of that?
Come and see me after the meeting. I'll talk to you about that. We're talking about Stori Field right now.
Well, I'm talking about housing in general.
I'd be happy to answer that.
You know,
Yes, we're still in negotiation there. That's been a long process. I'll answer any questions about Panorama Estates that you want. But the broader question, housing. Hi, I'm Mayor Todd Coppernoll. Okay, so critical point. State law says the term net new construction. Anybody that brought a pen should write that down. Net new construction. What that means is everything we do essentially is tied to the collection of property tax. We all know that. We own buildings, we pay taxes, right? Okay, so in 2010, the state said if you want to add new money to the general fund for your city, your village, your county, you have to get new buildings. No new buildings, no new money. Okay? Think about that. If you live in Wanakee, they don't build a new house, they build a new neighborhood. And money just comes because you're collecting more tax. Verona has Epic, so money. Every time a municipality can build, the state allows that municipality more money in their general fund to pay their cops, to fix their streets, all the things you pay for. Well, we're in Richland County, where that just doesn't organically happen. We're an hour from a city, we're not on the interstate. It's a lot more challenging. And people miss frequently the rugged terrain that we're surrounded by that makes it difficult to build. You can't put houses on top of these hills and put them on city water because you can't pump water up a grade like this in the world. So there's a lot of land here we can't put homes on. We also have floodplain created by the river. There's a lot of land there we can't put homes on, or businesses, okay? So the struggle is, where can you build? And if you don't build, you fall behind in your ability to pay the bills. And then you raise property taxes, or you borrow money, which the counties had to do every year, to pay the bills. You borrow money and put it back in. Furthermore, at the county level, which isn't really the city, but you need to know this, I don't remember the acronym right now because the city doesn't work with this program. Howard Merkland just told me this in the last week. He said under the state's revenue share program, the amount of money the state's been sending back to the county has been declining every year. I said, why is that? He said, because part of the program is, on certain things, when the county spends money, it gets reimbursed. Through that, our county's broke. So because they're not spending money they don't have, they're getting less money every year from the state, which has created this ridiculous downward spiral in the county's ability to fund itself. The way out of that is new construction. The best way to build is homes, because it also brings people here who work here, shop here, pay sales tax, support businesses, you understand. So the effort is to build homes. Well, where can you build homes? Well, most of the farmers don't want to sell an acre, okay? Can't go up that hill, can't go down by the river. There's Stori Field. Flat buildable, I'll be right with you. Flat buildable, and so what I said is, let's investigate this with a plan that, number one, don't touch that drainage. We all know what's in there. Don't fill the whole thing in, leave a significant green space, but make sound use of this and get some more homes where we can get them because we need them. Go ahead, sir.
How much is this going to cost the taxpayers?
Well, hopefully nothing. We're not done yet. This is a conceptual drawing to show you guys the idea. And what we've done is we put this out for bid with prospective builders, so nothing's done at all yet.
Well, I guess where I'm going here is we've got a multi-million-dollar deficit as we speak. Sometimes it seems like we're going the wrong way.
The city does not have a deficit at all.
Okay, how about Richland County?
County's not involved in the project.
So you're saying we don't have a deficit that's gonna come due the 24th. I guess maybe I read the wrong paper.
City of
Okay,
Richland
the
Center,
2024.
City of Richland Center does not have a deficit. The county, that's their deal, but they're not on this. This is not their project, so what this would do would not affect county funding or taxation. The city's not running a deficit, sir.
I'm sure you probably read the articles in Observer. It sounds like, it's doom and gloom thing. I think a lot of Eric Olson. I think he probably tells the truth. It don't sound like, okay, I don't want to be negative about Richland Center. Well, I like Richland Center. I was born here. But sometimes just wonder if we ain't going the wrong way. For instance, the university, that was kind of a crazy thing too.
State made that decision. And that agreement on that campus, which again has nothing to do with why we're here right now, that is an agreement that has existed since the 1960s between Richland County and the university system. The city's not on any of those documents at all. We have no control over whatever has or does happen to that campus. That's the county and the state. The UW system made that call. But the reason we're doing this are the reasons I just gave. The city can control what it can control, and we have an obligation to the taxpayers and the people who live here to make sound choices. If we don't get building, we will go backwards. We will do what has happened to the county.
I got another question.
Mhm.
Basically, I've lived here all my life.
Mhm.
I live right by Stori Field.
Mhm.
Anyway, for whatever reason, probably due to Richland Center not gaining any people, the population sign has been basically 5,000 for ever since I was in high school. And you know what? I think it changes from time to time. There was a time I could remember when we had more than one different amount on the population signs. But yes,
What year did you get out of high school?
what year did I get out of high school?
Yeah.
1961.
Okay, and I did in '85.
Guess what? 1961. That's a number you could turn upside down. And it's still the same number.
Nice. So if you, when I was a kid in the 70s, I'm doing this from memory, it's a long time ago. I think our population sign said 5,086, and now it says 5114. I get it. That's why you do these things. When you don't do these things, you don't get new things. People ask me all the time, how about a grocery store? You want to know why none of them have come? Because they're looking for population growth that has not happened. That's it. They run market surveys and they go, you got stagnant population, aging population, you need more people, you need what we're trying to do. And it's just one example. We came that close to adding TJ Maxx to this town about 3 months ago. They were gonna open in July until they ran the same study and said, get new people, call me back. You gotta show me something, you got the same number you had 50 years ago. Which is true. We do have the same number we had 50 years ago. That's why you look where you can and you get creative. And you say, how can we keep the feel of the neighborhood? Because it does matter. Keep a green space, don't fill that whole thing in. But get something we don't have that can help this place. Grow the tax base, keep jobs, add people. And that's why we have these conceptual drawings in front of you guys. I was on the cross-country team in high school. I was a twig. Hundreds and hundreds of laps around that track. I get the historical significance. From a fiscal standpoint, it would be grotesquely irresponsible for the city to not pursue things like this. Because we will end up running a deficit like the county if we don't do these things we can do. We don't have Reedsburg's open land to build 100 units here and 80 there. We bring builders down here, and they go, well, we want to build there. And we show them the topography. They go, oh my God, that's a mountain. I can't build there. I'm going to stay in Reedsburg. I'm going to go to Wanakee. And we go. So we're here. And we don't want a dramatic change to the feel of the neighborhood either. I live right over the hill on 8th Street. I walk through the area. I'm respectful of what is and why you bought your homes where you did. I'm not gonna stand here and let your taxes get counted every year because somebody said, don't build new homes where you wanna build them. Because that's what you're gonna get if we don't. That's state law. Okay, I didn't hear the please. Go ahead.
Go ahead if you were
I
finished.
didn't hear the question you had asked Jason. I walked in the answer. Did you get the answer you were?
Well, I guess I think that the majority of the people that live around Stori Field enjoy that green area. They don't see it as a blighted area. There's quite a bit of activity, although not as much as when the old high school was there. But certainly, you know, I'm 75 years old, and that place has been there all of my life. I hate to see duplexes go in there, and you profess that that's going to keep us from going into a deficit by building 7 duplexes on a green space and building a mosquito pond in the middle of it. I just object to it. I'm not being grotesque, volatile about it, but I just think it's a poor idea to take Stori Field when you have other areas. And I know you profess you're only talking about Stori Field, now you're talking about everything else yourself.
No, I'm trying to indicate why, because I was asked why here. And the why here is because when you say there's plenty of other areas, which areas are you referring
Well,
to?
within a few years, you're gonna have to do something with the old hospital and the old parking lot there. What are you gonna do there?
We don't own it, they do.
Well,
Well, we don't own it. I can't come up with a plan until,
you didn't own necessarily the old high school either, but you were able to come up with funding to destroy the old high school and put apartments there.
I didn't, I lived in Wanakee when that happened.
Well,
We'll come up with a plan, sir, but we don't even own the property. I can't, right now.
there's a lot of property out here that you say you'd like to build on that you don't own.
True, because we have to be like that or we'll never build anything. And we can't do that. We can't do
Anybody
that.
that wants to build has to buy property, they don't usually give it away.
In this case, this was donated to the city. So we didn't spend any money.
Is that such a great idea?
Yes. And this is why, yes, sir?
Has this already been decided?
No, that's why we're here.
Council, is this why this meeting is here, to talk about the feasibility of doing this? Or has our town council and the mayor, whatever, have you decided to do this?
No, what's happened is we have the land now and we contracted with Bearbecker Engineering to go up there and give us a responsible idea. You know, what can you, it is a unique property, right? In the middle of a neighborhood with all that drainage under there and so on. So we had them come up and we did this to show us what the possibilities are and what we did. This is not legally required, an open house. We did it because we think you guys should see where we are and be able to ask questions and so forth. So we're down here. We didn't have to, but I just think, why wouldn't we? So we did. But no, this hasn't been decided. What we've done is we've asked builders for proposals on what would they do, what would it cost, right? So we don't know yet. We're not done. But that's why you're here now, to see how far we've gone and what people are telling us the possibilities are.
I got one more thing. I gotta shut up because other people wanna talk. You know, there's been times that, the flooding thing, we did our best. Richland Center's done their best to, keep the Pine River at bay. There's been times, several times, that Pine River, okay, the park was closed. Nobody could go to the park because they wouldn't let them there because of the flooding. And, different soccer teams or whatever, different people would have to come up to Stori Field because naturally that land is a lot higher. I mean, that's just something that maybe somebody ought to think about too.
So I understand, okay, and where we are and the plan commission and so forth, we know without question, we've got to add housing. For every income level, I'll tell you the truth, we're short on stock for the 20-year-old that just left his home and for the doctor. We just are. I get calls all the time. Todd, we lost another. What? We just brought another guy into Rockwell. He's in Spring Green. This one's in Reedsburg. This one's in Boscobel. We're doing a great job growing everybody else's tax base because we don't have places for people to come. So I don't know yet what will happen with the hospital. They don't even have the funding approved yet to build a new one. They're still working through that. So when they get that far, we'll engage in that. They have the land, but they're waiting on all kinds of grant applications. When they know where they're at, then they'll tell us and we'll work on that. This is here because it just makes sense, really. I mean, it's buildable. All the infrastructure's there, meaning utility hookups and streets. If we tried to do this in a field, it's millions. It's $250,000 to put in one block of street with curb and gutter right now. We couldn't do it. We'd have to borrow. And I know you're gonna tell me you don't want that. Well, you don't. So you look for the possibilities that make the most sense, that don't hurt the people. We've got to slow down the property tax hikes around here that have happened in the last few years. We've got to do it. I don't think anybody disagrees with that. You do that through projects like this. And this land was available, the infrastructure's there. State law says build it, get money, don't build it, you don't. And we're not saying fill the whole thing in and make it an eyesore, traffic hazard, any of that. This wouldn't do that. But we're not done yet, and that's why we're doing this, so that people can see the truth of what we're talking about, rather than reading Facebook and coming and telling me a bunch of stuff that's not true is gonna happen. Because that's out there too. So, Jason, did you have more you wanted to?
Oh, the lady in the front row had a question, I think.
Oh, I just wondered if there would be any street improvement or utility improvement to that 4.5 block area around Stori Field. The streets are in poor condition in that area right now.
Utility gentleman. That's a good question. Hey, that's a really good question.
I'm Steve Kruger.
And the end of Fifth Street too, that's all gravel.
Mhm.
I'm Steve Kruger, I'm the water superintendent. This is Todd Fisher, he's the wastewater superintendent. We do have phase 2 of the 7th Street project that was started last year that is going to connect where the project ended on 7th, go up over Cedar and halfway down 8th, and then it is coming back over Cedar to the intersection of Cedar and 5th, and going to do the 1 block of the dead end of 5th Street behind your place. You should be receiving a letter very soon about a public information meeting for that project. And in our long-range plans, we have hopes to do from Cedar back to 4th and then down 4th Street. So there are projects in the works in the neighborhood other than this one.
So for the wastewater utility, as Steve says, we've already started into, this area as our alternative for the project this year, but you can see we've got a new manhole here. Currently, our sewer coming off Valley View comes all the way right down through the middle of the football field. There's manholes under both goalposts on both ends. That's the entire sanitary sewer flow for Stori Drive and Valley View. And it's inaccessible to us for maintenance purposes because I really can't drive our big combo unit out here on the football field to get to the manhole to take care of that drainage area. So this will put a new sanitary sewer starting with this manhole here, all the way down the paved area, coming out to a new manhole that we're gonna have installed here as part of the alternative project that's already been approved and an awarded contract for this year. So it's gonna be a drastic improvement and an upgrade to the sanitary sewer in that whole area. So I know there was also a water model that was shared with our commission last week, and Valley View has had a number of breaks on it, has had some other dire concerns. There's fire flow potential. Again, this starts to open that area up where you're starting to get your looped flows through here with a new water main that allows some of that to have a lot better flow and contiguous through there depending on what the size of this main is. So overall, from a utility standpoint, it's only going to be an improvement all the way through.
Are you going to make any changes to the storm drainage?
We don't take care of storm. The storm is controlled by the city and the street department. However, there's going to be definite storm upgrades because those old catch basins that are out there along what used to be the sidelines to the football field are just inside the track. They're just graded metal covers over a huge drainage area that again can't really be cleaned. I mean, we can walk in them, but that's not the safest idea anymore under current law. So There's gonna be new storm along that street, along that curb and gutter, but again, this is all a proposal. What the city has asked for is a developer to come in and say, is this a workable idea? Or do you have a better idea? Can you maximize this into 10 units on less space? How are you gonna make this work? Correct? We're just simply asking for an RFP. You as a developer come in here and tell us how you would like to spend your money. This is our general idea of what we think can happen to at least get this ball rolling.
So you're saying right now the storm sewer that runs all the way underneath Stori Field, underneath Cedar Street, goes down Fifth Street and pours out into Fourth Street? Is there any plan to improve that?
As Steve said, the next phase after we finish these 3 phases of 7th, Cedar, and 8th, which would be 2024 is that plan right now to finish that 8th Street. Our next, according to our capital improvement program, the problem is we can't do this end first because we just keep getting more and more water built up here. So we're gonna go all the way down to Main Street at Main and 4th, take storm sewer all the way up 4th Street with the addition of water and sewer upgrades as we go. And we're figuring that'll be another 3-year phased in approach to get storm sewer all the way from Main Street. So it'll take care of this whole watershed area, but we have to build that line to us because right now, like you said, it surface drains out on the 4th. We can't just redo the sewer up there on Cedar and 4th or we get a problem. There's still no place for the water to go except the curb line. So we gotta go down to Main Street, come up 4th Street. We're figuring in 3 phases, but that's all budgetary driven. What can we afford to do and how big of a chunk can we take off every year to pay for versus doing it all at once?
You don't have a timeline for that?
We're hoping 3 years, so 25, 26, and 27, that storm sewer upgrade would be complete along with water and sanitary sewer all the way up 4th Street.
Todd, you mentioned the capital improvement plan, so some of this stuff has been in the works for a while. This wasn't just.
We have a 5-year capital improvement plan or program. It's basically water, sewer, and storm sewer driven. So it's Terry Nelson currently as the street department superintendent, the 2 of us. We're looking at our systems all the time saying, this is my worst area. I've got clay tile sewer that goes down the street like this. That's got to change. He's got water main breaks, 20 breaks in 30 years, needs to be replaced. Where there is no storm sewer, because storm sewer just got started being put in Richland Center about 25 years ago or 30 years ago, we've got a whole lot of areas up these valleys going up into these hills that aren't storm sewer. We've been relying on street curb and gutter, and we've had 500-year floods in the last 15 years. So you tell me, are the rain events different? We need storm sewer. So.
And to make sure that this development doesn't complicate any stormwater management issues is why there's a stormwater management pond here. Now, when I say pond, that's not really what it is because the design of these stormwater management locations is that the water they're designed to make the water dissipate within 24 hours of a basic flood event. So any amount of water that hits this impermeable surface drains, comes into this area, and that basin is designed to actually have the water dissipate into the groundwater within 24 hours. It does have an overflow model which allows for it to, if that water in there, like we had a really big flood event, right? We got 6 inches of rain in 6 hours or something. This would fill to a point where it does have to overflow, then hits that major storm sewer component, which you referred to, which comes out of Valley View Drive, goes this way, then comes out on North Cedar. And so in a severe flash flood type event, this could potentially get high enough where it would start to trickle water off over into an elevated drain system that then has to allow it to escape somewhere down the street. But this is specifically designed, and they were asked to specifically design a system that is intended to, for all practical purposes, never add to or create a more challenging storm water management issue. But the nice thing about that is you were concerned about mosquitoes. If our engineers do the right thing, right, and our builders do the right thing, this is green space.
Right.
It'll be a little divot there, but it's mowed. It's not intended to be tall grass or cattails or anything like that. It's a mowed surface.
That's a good point, too.
Am I correct in the assumption then that any tax revenue generated by these homes would go into the city general fund that would not be in any way earmarked for that particular neighborhood or area?
So the way this would go, so your property taxes all support the city, the county, the school district, and Southwest Tech. It would impact all four of them, but yeah, we don't have, that's what you may be thinking of, sometimes you hear like a TIF district, which means you basically mapped out a neighborhood and did that. But when you get into that, there's state regulations all over the place, it ties up, we don't do it when we don't have to. In fact, the state tells you can't do it unless you can prove there was a dire need to do that. Well, at this point, there's not, thank goodness, but to Todd's point and Steve's point, it was a great question about infrastructure upgrades up there. Your neighborhood, which from 8th Street to where the old high school was, including Valley View, those water mains, the one that is in the process, that up on 7th Street, had more than 20 clamps on that thing.
Last year's project got rid of 9 repair clamps. This year's project gets rid of 8 repair clamps. Phase 3 gets rid of another 7. Valley View's got 13 on it. It's a rough neighborhood for us.
And that's what we're trying to say here, is we know, and I live right over the hill. Infrastructure improvements had to happen anyway. He's had sewer problems up there consistently, and he's had water problems up there consistently. They're up there every winter fixing another main break all the time. Valley View, same thing. How's that water main?
There's 13.
13 clamps, right? So as your whole neighborhood is getting refreshed, it's gonna take a few years, because otherwise we'd have to borrow the money and dump it in a year, and then your taxes go nuts. So you do it in phases, but we're already started. They started last year with 7th Street, and then Todd just explained to you that plan expands and heads down to Main. The biggest issue up there, when Richland Center was built in these hills, I'm sure it was for budgetary reasons, but they didn't put storm sewers in. My goodness, look at all the water, right? It's got to go somewhere. It does end up in the river, but to get to the river, it's got to go right through town. And with the volume of rain now, in the wintertime on 8th Street, we get so much water down that thing. Drive up 8th once, it's like a roller coaster, that pavement. And at Park and 8th by the cemetery there, you get water all the way across, up the curb, over the sidewalk, into the hedges by the cemetery, and then it freezes because the water pools there. This is all the stuff we're trying to address, which we would be doing independently of this housing proposal here, but at the same time, while we're there, and while we have the land, and while we need the housing, and while we need to grow the tax revenue, and while we need more people, here we are. And today is for all of you to hear from us, come up and look at all this, give it a close look, ask any questions that you have, because we are being sensitive to the needs of the neighborhood and the feel of the neighborhood, and the fact that you folks bought your houses up there. We're being respectful of that and showing you what we're trying to do.
What about sidewalks?
Yeah, I don't know where that's gonna end. This is all in the request for proposal right now. I don't know, because these houses would be kind of back out of the way. I don't know, I mean, yeah, they didn't put them in Allison Park, they didn't put them in Wedgewood. I wasn't involved, those are way before I was elected, but I don't know why they didn't, because to me, that's different. You have people right in the city streets walking around down there. I'm not a big fan of that. But
to touch on the storm sewer, a real good recent example of the improvements that adding pipe and under a street where there isn't is Hazelton. We did 2 phases there, and I mean, you used to drive through that pond at the end, to come off from it. The water's just roaring down the curb and gutters. It was coming so fast and heavy. A lot of times it was into people's yards and the grass. Now, I don't think since the project we've had a rainstorm yet that the curbs haven't held. So, what's that?
You're correct. I was there.
Yeah. So again, it's a prime example. It's raining today, you can go see how that carries it. What you don't see is all the water that's underground in that piping system. Same thing would be these improvements here, where you're actually capturing it with open grates in a curb and gutter, catching it off these buildings, and then upgrade that all the way down to 4th Street, so it's flowing in under the street that way instead of all on the surface from that trench drain. So.
Are there more questions? Yeah.
Maybe this was covered before I came in. Is this zoned for multiple dwellings?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so that is another process that we have to go through, is to actually rezone it should this happen. And we're aware of that, but did not want to go through, we felt like that's premature to rezone at this point, because number one, we have to get concept. Number two, we want to make sure that the public is hearing this and that the decision makers don't say, well, we need to change course, because the rezone process, is a step that we would need to go if we're certain that we have a developer, we have a concept that's going to work, and then we would go ahead and rezone. But we don't want to, anyway, we felt it was premature to rezone it should the direction change on this.
Good question.
Do you expect one contractor to build all 7 of these units, or?
Another great question. Right, if you're in larger communities, that's oftentimes what you'll see, is you'll see a single contractor come in and say, I'm going to do a development. We're looking for that, but we're not sure that that's going to be possible. So that's, again, part of this process, is to find out, are there developers out there that are capable of handling this development that would take on the entire project? And we don't know the answer, but that's right now what we're looking for through the request for proposal process.
So you don't know if you'll be constructing one at a time for 15 years or 7 in 1 year?
Yeah, so another great question. We don't have the specifics on that, but what I have seen and what I believe we've discussed as a planning commission and what I've heard the council discuss is that when we're engaged with the developer, where the municipality has some control over the property and the development, the goal is to see that built out in a timely fashion. And I believe that there would be requirements written into it that, look, if you've got 3 up, you might take a break, but the minute the 3 up, you got to go on the second 3, so that it isn't this prolonged process. And that's part of the advantage of the municipality remaining involved. Because if you have a developer that comes and does it all himself, which again, that's not really happening in our market, but let's say it did, they could buy the land and say, you know what, I'm just feeling like I can get 10,000 more if I go build in, Middleton. Well, yes, you can. And so then this becomes a lower priority, and we are doing our best as a municipality to make sure that doesn't happen. So if somebody engages, they do it, is what we're trying our best to do.
So that's what we do there. That's called the developer's agreement, with parameters in there that cover what he's talking about. You're doing this. And the reason we can do that is because the city owns the land. So we can put some stipulations in there like that. If you want to use land that was ours, then you have to be done by this time or built to these specs, these kinds of things. And that's how you do that. So you don't end up with a mess where it took 15 years, which was something that could have been done in 2 or 3. Another advantage to Jason's point of why having, in this instance, a city-owned parcel be part of this, so you know it gets done, because we have some control over that.
Just if you think this is such a great idea, you must have some estimate of what the tax levy will be on the properties as they're constructed or after they're all constructed.
What do we
How
got?
much is it going to add to the city each year?
What do we got? We got, I think the project could build out at about $4 million, which means at $4 million, you're 4,000 times 30, so you're adding roughly $120,000 to your tax levy per year. You divide that by 3 because it's split 3 ways between the city, county, and the school systems. So 120, the city's share, if built out, the revenue that would come into the city's property tax coffer would be roughly $40,000 a year.
But in total, you said it's 120,000?
Correct.
So you've
Rough.
got potentially 14 occupants in 7 duplexes that are taxed at $140,000 a year.
Of course, the property tax is based on the property valuation. So, and that's a decision that every person in this room has had to make. So I had to make the choice. I want to live in Richland Center, and I pay the property tax. So these individuals would be making the same choice. Roughly, the valuation on these duplexes, when complete, is probably in that $500,000 range, which means $250,000 aside, maybe $350,000 aside. Again, we haven't run those very specific numbers, and that's why we're working to try to attract a developer whose specialty is identifying the exact building cost, and then we would be able to back into those numbers.
So from what Excuse me. From what you just said, $140,000 annually is expected to be the tax basis on these 7 properties, which might be occupied by 14 families. If you divide 14 into 140, you're going to tax a single site of a duplex $10,000 a year.
So if there's 14, so I actually said one, didn't I say 120?
You said 120,000.
So that's actually more like 8,000 or 9,000. My personal property taxes right now on my house are close to $6,000. These are brand new building, and my house was built, I believe, up in the late 80s, and I live right here in town. So these are the property tax that is paid is going to be commensurate with the value that's established, which is what every citizen is paying.
It really would come down to the assessment when they're done.
Correct.
Or the tax
Yeah.
assessment when they're done. So he's using an estimate here, but we'll know that for sure when they're built and Gretchen does her work in the assessor's office. But that's probably, Jason's done this a long time, I'm sure his estimate's at least going to be pretty close to where it'll come out.
It just seems odd to me that the average income in Richland Center is going to allow someone to move into a duplex and pay $8,500 a year taxes or $9,000 a year taxes on half of a duplex. I don't know if you're going to have very many occupants at that tax levy rate.
We believe that there is a market at all levels. There are none of these units available. Part of municipal involvement allows us to try to do it to hold costs down, but there is certainly a factor that is unknown out there. You know, we can't be 100% sure, but we're doing our best to consider all of those questions and concerns. And to your point, the reason why I was even able to answer your question is because we look at all of those data points and say, do we think this is good for Richland Center? Does it assist our tax base? And I want to add on to that. You know, we're talking about tax base here, but perhaps, without a doubt, the greatest thing that is achieved by adding homes to your community is the people that occupy them. So we need people in our schools. If you look at the demographic trends right now, there's fewer kids. We need to be a place that attracts families and kids, and those people then contribute in multiple ways, and perhaps one of the best ways is by adding, again, to our entire community. They involve themselves in your civic groups, they're involved in our schools, they're involved in government, and so people are a great asset and actually will help us move off of the 5,000 number for the last 60 years and hopefully move the community as a whole forward.
They seem to be asking all the questions.
That's all right.
What is the square footage of the duplexes that you're proposing?
Those were kind of a rough outline at about 1,500 square feet, but again,
For each side?
yes,
of the
per
duplex?
side. Correct.
So we're guessing a little bit here because we don't know which contractors will come forward, but to give yourself a good idea, there's a new one in Wedgwood with another one about to be built next to it. If you go down there, I would pretty much assure it's going to look like that or real close, if you want to see what we're talking about. The guy that built that one from Boscobel, his name's Dan Beinborn, and he's been doing duplexes 25 years. And I don't know if we're going to hear from him on this or not. I'm just telling you, he's built many, many of those. And so based on what it costs to build, ability to resell them and all of that, that's what he builds. So I would bet it'd be a lot like that if you want to go see one. That I would guess would be what we're going to see here.
It's a pretty standard pattern when you're trying to use the space reasonably and efficiently. And you know, one of the comments that we got, well, people like 2-car garages, you know, so this kind of skeleton is one that we felt would fit the largest demand block. We don't want to build something where only 2% of the people say, well, yeah, I find that interesting or livable, you know. So It is just a shell, and it is going to depend on what the developer comes in and his experience and says, look, I've done this before, I have them in this market or that market, and I think this will work here, and I'm willing to take the risk.
So this is a little bit of an aside, but it pertains. One other reason that I like this concept is the zero entry aspect. You know, we've got a lot of older people in town. My parents among them, right? There's no steps anywhere. I get a lot of calls, increasing every year number of calls from people in town that are still in their house that say, boy, it's getting harder. Yeah, well, and why aren't there more places like that? That's not the reason this drawing is here, but we did take that into consideration because that's a housing segment where the demand is really climbing. And it makes sense. I mean, my dad is partially infirm now. He's in a house with 5 steps. Well, right? I mean, that used to be easy for him. Well, it's not. So these would be laid out so that you just very much like you mentioned, the apartments Tom and Jane Williams have. They were designed with that in mind too, where if you remember where Lane Floral was once, those apartments, what I'm referring to.
I think there were 2, I've seen hands, yes, sir.
I'm sorry, the guy here late, I didn't realize it was gonna be a sit-down.
It wasn't intended to be, but hey, we go with the flow.
It's an open house, so.
You're right.
Yeah, some of these points have been asked, bear with me and say, you know, it's been covered, and I'll pick it up somehow later. But to your point, Mayor, you're talking now about elderly. You were just talking about bringing families in to fill our schools and stuff, so I'm just saying.
This is a great point. So when the Panorama building went up, the apartments, several local couples sold their houses and moved in. And younger people bought those houses. That's a sort of hidden benefit here, because I will bet you right now that happens again. Just on how many of these folks are calling me going, the lawn's getting harder to do, the steps are getting harder to do. Why don't we have condos? Why don't we have duplexes? Other towns do. And that's what I anticipate would happen if that's who bought these places.
Well, you bring up Panorama, I know that hasn't gone as planned. Phase 2 of that, again, the contractor just bring the point up. Can we get caught up in something there where someone buys up these lots and then they sit there? You know,
So
takes care of it.
we just talked about some of that, but I will answer it again. First of all, much less complex agreement than that was. That was 3 buildings over decades with this big, long, drawn-out 40-year payback plan. This is nothing like that, but it is a fair point to just mention that it happened. In this case, the developer's agreement, because the difference here is we don't own the real estate where Panorama is. The city owns that land. So we can put a lot more stipulations into when it gets built, how it gets built, and so forth, or you can't do it. We won't sign off on it because we own the land. Now, out there, that was done, that's right when I was moving back. Paul was still mayor. I'll go see him and ask them why they did it the way they did. But that's a very, very different project than this. But that's where there's an advantage to have city involvement because you can control all of that.
What is it currently zoned now?
Zone residential.
So, if I'm wrong, you know, tell me I'm wrong. So that would have to go through a hearing process to get that rezoned?
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
The answer I gave to that earlier, it's a great question, but is that we didn't feel it was appropriate to go through a zoning process prior to having conceptual plans out and really engaging the community, and felt like it could be a waste to rezone and then find out we have to divert and go another direction. So rezoning would come later in the process, but there is a hearing required.
Okay. Duplexes. Duplexes to me are rentals. That's how I view a duplex. Is that what these are going to be? Is someone going to own that? Maybe one half of it, maybe no halves of it, and it becomes a rental?
Yeah, so that's another great question. We have if I detect a sentiment, private ownership is better. And I think that the mayor has said that numerous times. We tend to agree. So in the request for proposal for a developer that we have right now, one of the line items in that request is that it would be our desire to have them developed as 0 lot line and a condo association, which means each side would be owned by the person that lives there. Now, will it end up that way? We don't know, but we were sensitive to the fact that private ownership is often perceived, and I believe there's data behind it, right, that suggests a private owner may take better care of their property, so we've tried to direct it that way.
Just a point to that, so I lived in Hastings, Minnesota for a while. That for a, a medium-sized city, had some pretty screwed up zoning. Just can tell you that. That went on with duplexes. They were plunked about anywhere. You could drive by, I got a witness to this here with me. One roof might be done on one side and one roof not on the other. Now, I don't know how you can set up catches to prevent that, but one half would be nice.
We're aware, we know, and in this last 3 years or so, we've done a ton of work to try to clean up zoning here, because we kind of said the same thing. You look down, for instance, there was a very strict set of rules placed on the North Industrial Park when they bought the land and did it. And when we got our hands on it and said, well, if somebody wants to build, let's look at this. We got the certified survey map out. Some of those lots were lined right down the middle of the street. Hence, had we sold a lot, somebody legally would own a piece of a city street because the map was wrong. That's an easy example, and we found several of those.
There's something with the road above Storyfield. Is there how the land lays where the road is?
Which one, which street?
Above it.
Story,
Not-
Valley View Drive?
Yeah.
No, they
yeah.
call it the dirt road. That's the one they do. It has no street sign on it.
No,
Above
well,
it.
it runs
Just-
right along the top. It headed up to Valley View.
Chestnut,
Chestnut here?
Chestnut between Fourth and Valley View.
Yeah.
That's the area, yeah.
Yeah, so the interesting thing about that is in the process of the property exchange, we figured out that that section of street was never dedicated to the city. So technically that section of the street had been in the school's ownership all of these years, and I think that it really became detected when we moved through the process of surveying and doing title searches. So now the street has been dedicated to the city, and I know that it is one that does need attention, and so it sometimes takes, as the mayor alluded to, it takes some time sometimes to work those into a process, because we're often working on a 3 to 5 to even longer year planning process, but I know that one we're aware, and it's in the city's ownership now, and so the intent would be to improve it.
You're right. Whenever Chestnut Street became a street, which was to put Valley View in, I don't know when that was, decades ago, right? They did it, paved it, city plowed it for all those years, and when we started looking at this, it was never dedicated as a street. They just missed it. I don't know, decades ago, they just missed it. So Chestnut Street technically was never a street. I'll give you another one. When we worked on the dialysis center project, they would not build unless the pharmacy came too, because they wanted the renter. And the pharmacy would not go unless they had a drive-through window. And they said our drive-through has to empty onto Congress Street. We said no problem, except when we grabbed that one, when they put the dike in and redid everything, the city abandoned Congress Street kind of behind the bowling alley on that end. And that's private now, except by mistake, they abandoned about 2 extra blocks. And the lot line for our house was dead in the center of the street. We fixed all of that, made the city street a city street again, and our house, thank goodness, said, we'll sign. Yeah, that was a mistake. They could have said buy it, because that got signed off on decades ago when the dike got done. So we don't, go to the paper with every one of these we find. But we've corrected, between zoning and these certified survey maps, it's a long list of things that have been corrected in the last few years. And Chestnut Street, you're right. It was there all that time, but technically wasn't a street. It was just missed when they did it.
Just one more quick item. It's probably been talked about. If it has, I can catch up.
Sure. Yeah,
And that's on the infrastructure. Of course, I live on the bottom end of Storyfield, the west side. All right. You're going to add more drainage by surfacing roofs.
Todd they just went over all of this.
Okay.
but stick
can
around
talk to
and
you
we'll tell you,
afterwards.
stick around. so
Yeah,
we can-
okay, fine. But the other, along with that, is the drainage as it is today. And is anything gonna happen on down Fifth Street?
Yes.
Fifth Street and Fourth Street. And like I said, I can give you some of the parameters to that. We've kind of already covered it here, but I'll talk to you when this group ends.
Yeah, that's why we went, it's a great point, and yes, and it's in the plan for the next few years. Well, the way we're doing all of this stuff, the street projects up there, the sewer projects up there, we'd love to just do it all in a year and say we're good, but then the city would be borrowing money, it'd be a mess.
Lots
So-
of money would be good for me.
So we're doing, each of these projects, like the street project that started with 7th Street, Cedar and 8th, that's 3 summers worth, so we didn't have to borrow any money, raise taxes. And then the next phase would be the next 3 years too, but it's all in the plan. And some of this stuff was already in the plan before we ever touched this, because Todd would come and tell us he's got tree root issues in the sewer lines up there, things like this. And we talked about how much water runs down through there, and it's more all the time with the rain we get. So, yep, capital improvements over the next few years.
I don't know if this was brought up before. We talk about wanting to make Richland Center a welcoming place for families and a nice place to live. Have you taken into account that that green space is so valuable? We have families from all over town, not just our area, using it. Winter, summer, dog walkers, and that's something you never can replace. Once that's gone, it's gone. And it affects our neighborhood, but it also affects the families that use it. We have soccer players, we have sleigh riders, there's something going on with families all the time. And I feel it's a real shame our end of town does not have any green space except the cemetery, which, is fine. I don't mind walking in the cemetery, but families don't particularly want to go over there and take a stroll. You've got Crosscut Park, which has been cut down quite a bit over the years, but it's still very viable. And you have the Arboretum area, which is nice, except that's not really anything for families to use for recreation. And I just think it's a shame that this really, really nice green space will be gone forever. And the other thing is, will the property values around there go down? Will we be reassessed? Because if our taxes aren't as high as they are now because of building this, then you're going to be losing some tax revenue there.
Yeah, no, good point. All of that, that's why we're not done here yet, is part of the answer, but I wouldn't expect, I don't see any reason why there would be a decrease in the other property values because actually your neighbor is going to be improved by the project. But I'm glad you brought that up about green space. So I've said every single time I've been on the radio, any time in a city council meeting or a planning commission meeting, that we need to be sensitive to what we put there. Don't fill the whole thing in. Don't do that. Leave a green space. I obviously definitely prefer to leave the sled hill alone. Just try to compromise some stuff here. Add housing that we need, grow the tax base that we need and all that. But don't forget you're in a neighborhood, right, that was built a different way, and try to be sensitive. I know you moved over from Seminary Street.
Yeah,
I
and we
know.
had a green space behind us on Seminary Street,
But
which we loved.
I know.
And then we had Ridgeview Commons, which
Yeah.
used to have the barn, but that
Yeah.
was, fine, except that when Ridgeview Commons was built, they had a picture in the paper, it was to be 2 stories, and it ended up to be 3 stories. So, you just never know what's going to happen, and that's why I'm concerned with this.
And I get it, and that's why we're talking to everybody, and not just calling you down here saying, guess what we're doing tomorrow.
Yeah.
We're not gonna do that to you. But I mean, Edie's been up on Bellevue Drive for almost 10 years now. Right? Is it 50 years? Yeah, I just saw Gary. What-
Well, how
Yeah.
old, he's 54. He was born there, but Mark was a baby.
Okay,
And that's
Mark-
your age.
Mark's my age.
And you are,
I'll be 56 in July.
okay, I'm afraid I've been there for 56 years. Because he was a few months old when we moved there. So I've probably been there longer than anybody in this room. I guess that means I'm quite old.
Not as old as me.
Well,
And my kids really enjoyed that green space. And when the Argentina international students were here, they went sledding there twice. I mean, every time it snows, I look over and there they are, sledding on, you know.
I'm
Oh,
with you on the sled hill. These guys
Yeah.
have heard it from me 800 times.
Oh, yeah. It's very active. It's a
Mhm.
very active place, used by children and adults, ball games, galore, yeah.
And it is more centralized too for families
Mhm.
to use that. We see it all the time. Over there, the kids that play football, they're over there practicing, or soccer, or baseball, they're using it for that. Have you guys had any other thoughts on alternative locations for this? Like out by the college or some other location? Or a lot that's been tore down that might,
Yeah.
you know,
Yes.
spread these out to different locations instead of all in one location?
Yes, tons of them, and you keep coming back with the same answer. You can't build it there, that's floodplain. You can't build it there, the topography's wrong. You can't build it there, they won't sell the land. Over and over and over and over again. And you gotta understand, folks, all your concern, I get it about green spaces and sled hills. I'm trying, my part in this is to try to compromise here. They know it. You know it. You know it. The first time I showed you this property, I said, leave the sled hill, it's right here. I did.
Yeah, I mean, that's from day one, and talking about the concept was always to honor the neighborhood by retaining some
I
of
know,
the
but
green
this one has
space.
8,
So
and that has
that's,
7.
But
I mean, this section here is probably over an acre, and then that section there is where the sled hill is, and so it was intentionally done that way to try to preserve green space for the neighborhood.
But if we, so the thing is,
What
guys,
is it decided?
we really do struggle with where you can build. It's a lot harder here than it is in other towns. The builders, we get builders now, they call now, that's a change. When I got elected mayor, builders didn't want to talk to us. They do now. But then they'll come down and go, man, it costs so much money to move that dirt because the ground goes like this, because I can't make any money here. And then if we build there, we gotta subsidize that. Guess who's paying that? So we don't do it. Okay, this is flat ground with the infrastructure in place. The fact that utility connections are there for all your homes and the streets there, that's millions off what it would cost if we went to some cornfield, or just as an example, where you have to put all that in. We looked at a couple of other places, and just for infrastructure, you haven't built a home, you haven't sold a lot. Some of these were $2.1 to $3.5 million just to get the utility hookups in the street in there.
But how many homes would that service? Now, I heard that somewhere around $800,000 for the infrastructure for this. You were at a Red meeting or something that I watched on video, and I think that's the number you threw out.
Yeah, I think the document that Bierbecker Engineering has produced suggested 700,000.
That's
So
the
yeah,
last number.
I may have misquoted, but you're in the ballpark.
Yeah, so that's for 7 homes. Now, when you're talking million, how many homes are you maybe talking 20 or more?
Depends on where you're at, but the one that I'm referring to, we were hoping to put 30 in there, and then the next thing that happened was, because people that own land know how scarce the land is, we simply couldn't buy the land for what they want. It would, if you guys, you want to get mad, let us do one of those and see what it would do to your taxes. Because the two choices would be, here it comes, pay it, or we're going to do a 20-year bond and pay it over 20 years. If we do something like that, is we've been really hesitant. The city not only is not running a deficit, which I was asked, we have cash on hand, and we have more than two-thirds of our borrowing capacity available to us, because we've been very cognizant of the fact that some of the other entities, I told you earlier, the county budget has been a mess. You know it. I'm not beating them up, but you know it. So you've seen the increase in your property taxes on the county side, and you know what the school district did. You do. We didn't do that. We're not going to do that. And it kind of leads us all to here. So then you go, Shirley's going to tell me about green space. I get it. Everybody's going to tell me about their taxes. I get it. And then the next thing is there's no place to live, so my kid moved to Boscoville, Mayor. Why don't you do something about it? Which happens all the time. So where's the blend? That's the blend.
Have you showed these concepts to any of these builders that are talking to you?
We just started to do that. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, so there's been a request for proposal released on, did we release it on Monday? We released it on Monday, so it's actually up on the city website, and the engineering firm that we've been working with is reaching out to developers that they have in their network. And so, yeah, we've just started to try to circulate it to potential developers.